Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
And welcome to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast.
Hi, my name is Steve Lacy.
And I'm Phil Thompson. Great to have you here again. Thanks so much for being with us. And we do this usually every week. We are a tech company. What's our company name, Steve?
Our company name has nothing to do with our products, but JSL Solutions. So we provide products for live streaming, mobile apps, church management, and our newest thing, Greeter.Church.
Greeter.Church, which remains a mystery to all of us. No. Well, we can talk a little bit about our products another time, but we do StreamingChurch.tv, which is the video, and ChurchAppLive.com, which is the mobile apps. But we're not really here to blow our own horns, are we?
No, we have a special guest.
We do. Our special guest is Lauren Hunter, and Lauren is an entrepreneur. She's actually a freelance writer, but the founder and editor of Church Tech Today, and she uses that platform to encourage churches to use technology in a better way to improve every area of their ministry, kind of like what we do. And she's also a wife. And according to her bio here, she's a wife to a pretty awesome coach and a mom of 4 great kids. And she's also a worship leader, and she's a poet. And I didn't know it, that she was a poet. Hey, Lauren, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. It's really nice to be on this podcast with you guys. Thanks for all the good work that you do to share tips and technology hacks, if you will, for churches out there. I know everyone appreciates it.
Well, we like to do this podcast. We really do like to help churches. That's our heart, is to help ministries and churches. And so that's one of the reasons we do the podcast. And so speaking of helping churches out, thanks for coming on and being our guest today. And you wrote an article a little while back about, I think it was called 10 Ways to Bless Your Volunteers. Was that what it was called?
Close, yeah. I wrote it for Thanksgiving, but also looking ahead to National Volunteer Week, which is in April every year. Yeah. So it's really something that churches could benefit from pretty much any time of the year, I think. How to thank their volunteers and bless them any old time.
Yeah, well,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And volunteers, I mean, obviously they're kind of the bedrock, in my opinion, of ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, they
I didn't know they had a national week. I knew about Pastor Appreciation Month, and that's interesting. I've been doing this a long time, and
it's kind of highlighted, I think, maybe more in the nonprofit world than really the church community. But I think it's a really valuable week. I know in my life, I volunteer at my kids' school. I volunteer occasionally in the community. I volunteer at my church. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying there's multiple areas, where people tend to be volunteering, one or two different schools, and even helping your neighbors. So I think any way that we can connect the church with how valuable volunteer work is a really positive thing.
Yeah, it would help. Not only appreciate those that are there, but it would lead to encouraging others to volunteer. If you got a good reputation.
And we deal with a lot of volunteers with our company. We have people that use churches that use our services, and many of them are volunteers that actually kind of head up those specific areas of ministry. So, all right, well, good. Well, so here's what I'd like to do. Can we just kind of jump into this? I've actually got your article here, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about these 10 points, and we'll see if we can get these done here within the next 25 minutes or so. So one of the things you mentioned was thank volunteers in the moment. So talk about in the moment when it comes to thanking and appreciating volunteers.
And I'll probably try to hit number 1 and number 2 because the first one is thank volunteers in the moment, and the second point is thank volunteers immediately afterward. Obviously, worship team can't really thank in the moment because you're busy on the stage. But there's lots of ways that I think just simply being grateful and training either the managing volunteer, if it's a manager like who manages the children's ministry on a Sunday morning, or if that's a paid staff member. But as they rove from one class to another to check in, or if they're, in one at a larger church, maybe a elementary room where there's multiple classes going on, to be able to really take advantage of those moments, while kids are filtering in before church starts, or immediately afterward, or even during when there's a quiet moment, to sneak up and just say, hey, Bob, I really appreciate you today. Thank you. That's a really simple way, but profound. I know I try to do that with my kids, catch them in a moment of doing something good and say thank you. So just it helps, I think, the leader also be grateful for the support and the volunteers that they have to serve alongside them. So just kind of, as a staff, whether it's the pastor kind of encouraging that, or, head of staff or executive pastor, just really encouraging the staff to lead their volunteers with an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah. Being intentional, really, for me, I do a little bit of part-time work with a church, and I have to be real intentional. I have to remember, okay, I need to go into this, because it's easy to get caught up and get busy.
Totally.
But to be intentional and intentionally thank people, spend some time to do that. So.
Yep.
All right. So
then the second point about thanking volunteers immediately after, in the article, we kind of mention a few things that you could do, like sending a text message, thank you. Often, youth leaders or millennials, not so good at checking email the majority of the time, and snail mail. I mean, sometimes maybe don't have their address, or maybe they, are off to college or home from break and helping. So, I mean, just a low barrier of entry way to say thank you is sending a text message one by one. Another great way is to send a handwritten thank you note from time to time, or send an email. Like our worship leader at Granite Springs Church, where I worship, he follows up Sunday service. He's already got the emails in a group email list from sending out all the music to us, and he'll just click reply and say, hey guys, thanks so much. It was a joy to serve with you. It's a really minor thing, but it really goes a long way to show that you care and that you value your volunteers.
It really does. Showing a little bit of appreciation really does go.
It's a good idea. I mean, the text or the email, and it doesn't take much to do, and people will get to go, wow.
Yeah. Let me jump to another point here, because I want to hear you elaborate on this next point. Protect your volunteers. What do you mean by protecting your volunteers?
Okay, so I have to tell a story to illuminate this point. At the time I was on the worship team, I also had, or I still have 4 kids, but I think the youngest were in like the toddler room, so maybe had like a 1 and a 3-year-old in the toddler room, and I was on the emergency backup volunteer list for helping with kids ministry. So I say that chuckling because if you can remember, maybe when you had like toddlers or babies, like the last thing you really want to do is like serve with a whole bunch more toddlers or babies, because you're wiped out. So I laugh because my sweet dear friend Lori, who was in charge of children's ministry, had reached out, and I had already been summoned to be on the worship team like the day before. It might have been the same day. And so that very, next day, Lori emails me and says, oh, I'm down a couple volunteers. It's winter. Everybody's got the flu. Can you serve? And I felt like I was in a pickle because I had so many kids in childcare. So I know it's hard, and there are some church management software programs where it's distributed among all the leaders, and they, would sign up those people, and you might be able to go in and see who's already volunteering somewhere, and then you're asking people that are fresh that are not signed up for another role. But we didn't really have that structure set up. So there's that side of things, like not asking the people who tend to always be volunteering, like everybody gravitates towards them, and you end up, 5 people are asking the same couple to volunteer in different ministries over and over again, kind of burning them out, so to speak. It's the old 80-20, that 20% of the people are doing 80% or 100% of the work. And so just being careful about that, maybe as a ministry staff, looking at, first would be keeping track of who is volunteering, and then maybe looking at that role sheet and comparing it to who could potentially come into a volunteer role, and kind of being strategic about that. Maybe a pastor calling someone who's maybe new but has jumped right in with 2 feet, and maybe encouraging them to volunteer. And also, I think it's important to respect people's no if they do say no, and then maybe ask permission to reach out to them again in another month. But that's what I mean by protecting. Making sure people feel valued and not overusing people or over asking.
Yeah, I would think it would take some,
because it's real easy to feel resentful, Yeah.
I would think it'd take some coordination between the kind of the ministry leader areas to not try to draft the same people for their the different ministries. And
it's a challenge.
Yeah, draft is a good word. It's baseball season.
So let me throw you a curveball here. This is not in your article, but I'm curious, because you've had lots and lots of experience with church work and volunteers. That's volunteers. Getting volunteers for almost any area is always a challenge. And we were interviewing somebody a few weeks ago who I thought he had a really good point, and see what you feel about his point here. And I don't remember who it was now, but one of the things he said was, you have certain people that are extroverts and are really good, like the Army, for instance, has recruiters. The military has recruiters. Mm-hmm. So why not find somebody in your church that's an extrovert and good with people and make them your volunteer recruiter? So not just for one area of ministry, but for the whole kit, bang, and caboodle. I mean, and I thought at the time when I heard that, I thought that's a pretty good idea, and really thought about that, because the struggle I've been working with churches for a long time too. It's always a struggle for, find children's workers, find, even tech team workers perhaps, and in different areas, greeters, ushers. Right. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of it might depend on the size of the organization. So, I mean, our church is somewhere 250 to 300. The previous church that we were at for 15 years had, around 800 people. We just visited a church this past weekend that's a part of a, huge mega church in Northern California. It's a satellite campus, so it's fairly big, thousands, I'm sure. I think some of it could depend on that. I know for me, I think it would feel a little bit of a burden, if I was volunteering to be the volunteer manager of a whole church, that would feel a little bit overwhelming. Right. Unless it's a paid position, then perhaps, because the goal, I think, would be to meet with each ministry area coordinator or leader and find out what their needs are, what their qualifications would be for those volunteers, and then do a search. There are a lot of church management softwares out there that have volunteer coordination built into their system, and I'm thinking of Church Community Builder is one, and I'm not sure about the software that you guys make. But there are ways to kind of put up a Craigslist, so to speak, of volunteer opportunities, and so then you email that out to the church, and they can log in and look at the various volunteer opportunities that are available. So in some ways, technology can help with this whole process. And I think in that case, if you did have a coordinator overseeing the technology process, that could definitely be a way to help out. Another point, with media and tech and worship, I know from experience the leaders tend to be extremely picky in who they want to be involved, right. and also there's some talent and skill involved that's a little bit more particular to the ministry, and so
that's true.
I think there's some sensitivity that each leader might have towards their own volunteers, and also might give them a little bit more ownership to be able to have somewhat control over who they invite to be in. Not that it's a club, but that there is sensitivity. I mean, not everybody's great with babies. Not everybody's great with teenagers. So I think too, as a church community, kind of building an environment of encouraging people to serve, and then praying through our gifting. Maybe having a class on spiritual gifts and how God has gifted you to serve, and incorporating a service component to becoming, a member of the church, or key part. That's how God works, right? Yeah, when you are plugged in and you love the Lord, the next step is often serving.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get back to our outline here. That we need our top 10 tips. Huh?
I got off track here. We'll see how far we get.
Phil's steering us into a ditch here.
Absolutely. I tend to do that. All right. All right. So let's jump back in here. You have a point here that's called listen to your volunteers. So, I mean, you might think offhand, well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But let's talk a little bit about that. Let's go a little bit deeper. When you say listen to volunteers, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, many ministry volunteers don't have a ministry degree or full-time church background, but a lot of times they're coming to the church and their background might be in business or in education or some other field, and they might have really creative ideas. Listening without being critical is a hard skill for most of us, but making it an environment where input is valued. And maybe, you listen and you take note, but don't agree to anything on the spot. I mean, that's a good MO for life, right? But really digesting or even calling key volunteers and asking them for feedback or ideas and being open to that. Often it seems like, especially when there's paid staff, they sort of protect their little corner of the church and want to be in control of all that, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can kind of hamper volunteer involvement. And if there's a super controlling leader that doesn't want any input from volunteers, often volunteers will get disgruntled and kind of move on to a different ministry or even a different church. So I think we have to be sensitive to the volunteers and where they're coming from and, spend time with them. That was point number 3. Have coffee with somebody, hear their story, see where they're coming from. God works in all kinds of awesome ways, and sometimes He's, refining us even through the volunteers that are involved in the ministries that we're serving in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I got a little defensive there when you mentioned controller, but we'll move on from there. I'm making fun of you.
I can relate.
I am a little bit of a controller. I am a controller, but I have learned, over the years, you've got to just let things go and let people, give them some opportunities. All right. Here's a good point that you brought up. And you bring up in this article, 10 Ways to Bless Volunteers. Tell your volunteers stories. Tell your volunteers stories. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite points. You'll hear a lot in kind of the church communication space if you look at any of the great bloggers out there, and you've had like Phil Bodel. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but there's a few guys.
Let me stop you there. You're not the only one that didn't say Phil's last name right. It's
he's written. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
He's written for Church Tech Today before as well. He's a youngin. He's like a millennial and writes from a different perspective. But there's a lot of people, and Kim Meyer and Jenny Catron. There's a lot of really cool, influential church communicators out there, and you'll hear the word storytelling a lot. Right. Editorial is another word, or testimony is another word. But, it's really awesome. I think God works through our testimony in a really powerful way. And I know especially for, I have 2 kids who are in middle school, and often, they just came back from winter camp, and my daughter is recounting to me the testimony that the pastor told them. Of course, it was a typical youth ministry kind of story of his life. He went off the rails. He had a DUI. He was in a car accident. Awful stuff like that. But how God saved him through that. And so she was just mesmerized by his story and so moved by it. And I think that's true for everyone. We want to hear how God is working in other people's lives. It inspires us to be looking and listening for how God is working in our own lives. So how can churches do that and apply that?
Yeah. How can they get that out there? How can they publish? I use the word publish, but how can they get that story out there? What are your suggestions?
Yeah, there's quite a few ways. First one that comes to mind is a live testimony. Invite someone after you hear their story and kind of vet it a little bit. Invite them to the platform and encourage them to succinctly, in 5 minutes or less, tell a portion of their testimony or something recently, how God stepped in and helped them, or how they God encouraged them to give, and it's blessed their family in some way that they didn't imagine. And there's an infinite number of ways that you can encourage people to share a testimony. And so you can take that. I was thinking of you guys doing live streaming, how if somebody's sharing that in a service and it's being live streamed, it's hitting 3 audiences at once. It's hitting the local audience, it's hitting people who can't come to church in town who are watching the live stream, it's hitting the global audience of people who might be watching on YouTube or Facebook or wherever it's being streamed to. So you've got that. You can also repurpose that story and write it down. Tell it in an email newsletter or a blog article on your church website, or do a video testimony that would be standalone that could go on your church's YouTube channel. Any story like that can be used in probably 10 different ways to be a part of a church communication plan that's really sharing the heart of your church and what your church is all about.
Absolutely. And, with today's technology, you mentioned video. Today you can whip out your iPhone and do a video, and, you just do it with very minimal, just make sure the audio is good and the lighting's good, and you've got a video that you can post. And there's some easy ways to do that today, which I think means a lot.
Absolutely. And, of course, getting permission for all that would be important. Just like in children's ministry, you have to get permission to use photos of a child. Right. That's just a total side note. But one of the other points in the article was to take pictures and share via social media. And so, in parentheses, I have with their permission, make sure it's someone who's okay with the tag on Facebook or wherever you're going to post it.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're talking with Lauren Hunter from Church Tech today. We're going through the top 10 ways to bless your volunteers. And we've got through the first 6 right now, right? We've
6
got
or 7, yeah.
Thank your volunteers in the moment, thank them immediately afterwards, spend time with your volunteers, protect them, listen to them, and then tell their stories.
Yeah. And now, the other point you make here on this article, which is a great article, and all your stuff is really good stuff. Church Tech Today, is the website churchtechtoday.com? Is that the website?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. We've got a couple more minutes left here, and I want to ask you quickly about Church Tech here in a moment. But volunteer dinner, special event, always a good way to appreciate your volunteers, right?
Right.
Is there a way?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
We had one of these at my church a while back, and there's a local mega church I mentioned before, and their bus picks up in the parking lot of our church. This is my previous church, and so we would crack jokes about that. Did your first time visiting? Oh, I missed the bus to Bayside. So there's a little bit of a banter there. But one year we actually they did a volunteer dinner, and we did a volunteer dinner, and I believe the volunteers traded service. So our team of 15 volunteers went over and served their volunteers, and then their volunteers served our volunteers. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's so symbiotic, right?
That's a great idea.
But what a great tribute.
Yeah, I've been to many a volunteer dinner, and yeah, it's you wonder, well, the people that normally set up and clean up are here getting served. How's this going to work? Everybody feels kind of guilty just walking out of the place. So that's a good idea to, because typically it's up to staff or whoever they can get to help the volunteers, which makes it even more challenging, I would think. But yeah, that's a good. Right. I never thought of that.
Teenagers come to mind too. I know we did a youth auction, and the teenagers would be the ones to serve the food and everything. But that's a good way. Slave labor, as we call it.
Yeah. Yeah, or just partner up with the church down the street, like you said. That's a good idea too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're about out of time here. I'm just going to run through these things here, and I'm going to probably point people to your website. But offer continuing education to volunteers. It takes a little more effort, but again, a worthy thing to do for your volunteers. Write letters of reference for students who volunteer. And also pray, which I think is very important in more ways than one. Praying for volunteers. I have found that when I take, and the whole thing on this list, the emphasis I see here, or at least my emphasis, is got to be intentional on all these things. And when I say intentional,
Absolutely.
I mean I have to make sure I do these things. Otherwise, I
Put
get
it on
too
the
busy.
calendar, huh?
Well, yeah, I mean something like that. So you're intentional, at least until it becomes a habit. But praying for volunteers, I think that's a great way because not only are you obviously helping them and praying for them, but they're on your mind when you're praying for them, and that can lead to even other things where you can be praying for somebody and realize, oh, this person's got a need here. How can we help them as a church? How can we serve them? Those kind of things, really important stuff here. Uh, so Lauren, Church Tech Today. I want to make sure we cover this because I like what you're doing here. You're the founder and the editor of Church Tech Today. How long has this been going on, and how did it start?
Yeah, good question. We're about to have a birthday, actually. We're turning 10
Wow.
on July 15th or thereabouts. The site is the same age as my third child, Bradley, and so that's how I remember how old it is. I got a start in public relations and marketing in the Bay Area. I'm in California, so that's San Francisco Bay Area, .com, late 90s. Went through all of the excitement of that industry, working in technology, communication and public relations, and then I made a little hop, skip, and a jump to a faith-based company, and then a hop, skip, and a jump up to out of the Bay Area to Sacramento, where I started consulting, and was consultant to a lot of church technology companies. And so it's pretty fun to be able to work with a lot of those different companies and really see the heart for ministry that they had. And Church Tech Today was really born out of that, as there wasn't really a magazine, especially an online magazine, that was focusing specifically on technology and communication for churches. So it was dear to my heart, and like I said, it's been almost 10 years now and still going strong. We get about 80 or 90,000 page views a month.
Nice.
And the site just keeps growing and growing, and so it's exciting to be able to interact with our readers and find out how we can help strengthen their use of technology and better their use of communication. And it's been a joy. It's really great to work in this market and get to interact with believers in such a valuable way. So
That's
I'm
great.
very blessed.
So churchtechtoday.com, that's where people can go. And how can they get a hold of you? They just go to the website if they want to get a hold of you and hit the contact link, maybe? Would that be a good one?
Yeah. My email is Lauren, Lauren, at churchtechtoday.com. So
Awesome.
if you're listening to this and you want to shoot me an email and ask a specific question, I do work with a great handful of consultants who do everything from setup of facilities like audio and visual, to church communication, to writing. I'm hoping to put together a little bit of a consultant hot sheet for churches, because there seems to be more of a need for that, somebody to bridge the gap between purchasing and figuring out what it is you need. So I know that churches need a lot of help in that area.
Yeah,
Yep.
That sounds like a great idea. Awesome. Okay, well, look, we're out of time, and Lauren Hunter's been our guest today. Lauren, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Steve. You guys have a blessed day, and I pray that this podcast helps people in ministry.
Absolutely. And folks, if you want to get a hold of us, you can just send us an email, support at StreamingChurch.tv, or just go to one of our many websites, one of them being StreamingChurch.tv, and you can chat with us there during business hours. We appreciate you spending some time listening to our podcast, and we'll just go ahead and wrap up. As Lauren mentioned, that's Steve Lacy across the table. I'm Phil Thompson. We will catch you next time on another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. Take care.